live from Los Angeles.
Podcaster and former ESPN contributor Pablo Torre is reporting that the Clippers circumvented the NBA salary cap by arranging a no-show job for Kawhi Leonard back in 2022.
When Steve Ballmer came and had that interview with Ramona Shelburne, he had plausible deniability.
Was there an exception made in terms of our relationship with aspiration? Absolutely not.
These revelations that came out today had substantially less plausible deniability.
The vice chairman of the Clippers made an independent decision to invest in aspiration 9 days before Kawhi Leonard got paid when no one else was getting paid.
How broad do your powers extend as far as penalties you can assess to the Clippers, to Kawhi Leonard?
I have very broad powers in these situations.
We start our show with a developing story which centers around one of the biggest question marks that hangs over the NBA. So we're 10 months into the investigation into Kawhi Leonard, the Clippers, and cap circumvention, and it's been a lengthy one. So what you're looking at here is just the timeline. So let's go back. September 3rd, 2025. That is when the NBA announced it would be investigating allegations of cap circumvention with the Clippers and Leonard that surrounded a sponsorship deal with the now bankrupt green banking company Aspiration. Fast forward a full NBA season later, and the Clippers, they have agreed to trade Kawhi Leonard to the Raptors. That was what Shams reported back on June 30th, but less than 2 weeks after that, the teams announced that the trade would be on hold until the league completed the investigation. And then a week after that is when Commissioner Adam Silver said that he wanted the investigation completed before the start of the 2026-2027 season, and that is where we begin now that we're all caught up. I'm joined by a quartet of our senior writers, Baxter Holmes, Ramona Shelburne, Mark Spears, and Vincent Goodwill. I want to start with you, Baxter, here because you have some lengthy new reporting on up to the minute what is happening with this investigation. So let's just start there with the timeline. How much longer could this continue on?
Well, it could go well into 2027, and part of that is because if you look at the collective bargaining agreement, it basically lays out the process for this, which could include arbitration. It could also include an appeals panel. There's several different parties that are coming to the table. It's not as simple as the NBA basically finding evidence and rendering punishment or not. There's a lot of different steps that have to play out from here and there, or from now until then. And different sources I've talked to have said, given all those steps, they have a hard time seeing any full resolution being reached before the start of the season.
Okay, so if full resolution, Ramona, is not reached before the start of the season and could continue into next calendar year, does that open up the possibility that Kawhi Leonard could be on the Clippers to start the season?
Yes. I mean, it sounds crazy after a trade like this, but this was the Toronto Raptors being given a choice of, are you willing to assume the risks of something happening with Kawhi Leonard after the investigation is completed? And they are not willing to assume those risks. And so if they're not, then we get to the end of the summer and there's not a resolution here, and there's nobody from the NBA who could say with 100% certainty that there won't be any fallout for Kawhi Leonard specifically. Then it's up to the Raptors. And I understand that because we just saw what happened with the Miami Heat and Terry Rozier. The NBA had an investigation. A couple of people pointed me to this very specifically. They had an investigation into Rozier. They didn't find anything. And then a year later, after the Heat had traded for him, they get stuck with a player who's now out of the league. And they had given up draft compensation and settled that out of court. So I can see a world in which Kawhi Leonard is back on the Clippers if this trade doesn't go through. And the Clippers, quite frankly, are fine with that. Yeah. Now, they did the trade. They like Brandon Ingram, but they like Kawhi Leonard too. This only happened because they weren't really willing to extend him.
I cannot remember a situation, Mark Spears, and you have covered the NBA much longer than I have, that has ever resulted in something quite like this. Can you? This feels very unprecedented.
Yeah, and then the guy kind of stuck in the middle is like all-star Brandon Ingram. Sure. He and Glorilla trying to figure this out right now. Like, are we going to be in Toronto or are we going to be in LA? And I talked briefly with Rich Paul, and he's like, it's a business. Brandon knows it's a business. He's fine either way. He's also making $40 million.
That helps.
So this is like, a first world problem. But he said Brandon's in good headspace. Either way, I would assume he might be upset, but according to Rich, he's good.
Adam Silver's in a real trick bag here because he has to make a decision on the investigation, but also look steps ahead on what arbitration could look like if there are penalties levied on Steve Ballmer. And we know Steve Ballmer can lawyer up as well as anybody. So you have to take not just the steps of the evidence, but also protect the league and their interest in this. And just this is so unprecedented, Malika and everyone else. A top 30 player, a two-time finals MVP who's still pretty much effective, tilting the balance of possibly the Eastern Conference if he goes to Toronto or if he stays with the Clippers.
The thing that I would emphasize here is the seriousness of the charge of salary cap circumvention. You know, I think some people might hear that and think that this is not that big of a deal, but the salary cap is really what governs competitive balance and fairness across the league. It's as serious as a charge as you can levy against an NBA team. So the NBA is going to look at this very carefully because that's not something that it's not a parking ticket. You can't just approach that kind of gingerly. And the Clippers are certainly, they've maintained their innocence from the very beginning that they did not funnel money to Kawhi Leonard through aspiration. And sources I've talked to have said they're motivated to clear their name however long this takes.
And by the way, this timeline isn't necessarily determined by the NBA. It's determined by how long it takes to gather the evidence that the outside law firm deems appropriate to see this to completion, right, Ramona? That's what we're looking at here.
Well, if you're the NBA and you've taken this long, you need to get it right because there's a legal challenge that the Clippers can have, but also the rest of the league, which is what Baxter's point. The rest of the league is going to want to see this report. One way or the other, they're going to want to read it. But does Steve Ballmer want them to see the rest? These are all things that are going to need to be arbitrated or at least discussed between the league and the Clippers before we even get to a resolution of whether or not Kawhi Leonard has any penalties on him.
Right, and this is something that's really chewy. There's a lot of very dense information here that we're working our way through, and I understand that it's the middle of July, but at the end of the day, why we started our show here is because there is a real possibility that Kawhi Leonard and the trade with the Toronto Raptors, that is completely in flux, and it may not go through. So I want to bring in our NBA analyst, Kendrick Perkins here. Perk, when you're looking at that fact, you've played in the NBA, you've analyzed it for many years. I've never seen something quite like this. How could this process, then the way it plays out, maybe shape the way that this season starts?
Well, look, let me say this. If I'm the Toronto Raptors, I'm finding a way to get up out of this deal. I'm finding a way to back out. I want out. I don't want to even be involved with this no more. I don't even want to think about having Kawhi Leonard in a uniform because now all of a sudden, say if this lingers on and they get closer to the season, and I understand Rich Paul is talking about Brandon Ingram understands it's a business, but we're talking about real human beings here. We're talking about Brandon Ingram and Grady Dick, who was a crucial part of the Raptors' success last year for us them being relevant again and making it to the postseason. If I'm the Raptors, I want to call this trade off. I want to call my two key rotation guys back in, and I want to start healing those wounds right now so that when I get to training camp, I don't have to deal with that. I don't have to worry about if a guy's going to be disgruntled. We saw the effect when it happened to Dalton Connect with the Los Angeles